Welcome to the MSDW Podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. And on this episode, I catch up with Murray Fife. Murray's a Dynamics 365 global black belt at Microsoft, and he has also spent years in the partner channel. He writes at his own A Tinkerer's Notebook blog. He publishes an ongoing series of books about Dynamics 365 and AX installation and setups, and he can frequently be found in person and online educating the community on some of the latest and greatest tech inside and around Dynamics. Murray's about as far ahead as anyone in terms of how to use standard Dynamics 365 tools and capabilities, and then how to tie them together with other Microsoft tech. And as you'll hear in this conversation, these days, Murray is looking farther and deeper into some of the surrounding Microsoft products than ever before. Hey, Murray Fife, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Happy to be here. Long time listener, first time.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of our listeners know who you are, but probably some don't also. Maybe you could give us a little rundown on what you've been up to recently, who you are and who you are.
Yeah. So my name's Murray Fife. I've been working with Dynamics for around about the past 10 years now. Not as long as some of the other veterans out there, but we sort of connected up while I was in the partner channel, and it's been really good always to talk to you. And then probably I think it was around about 3 years ago I got a chance to move from the partner channel up to Microsoft. So for the past 3 years I've been a TSP for the Dynamics product here at Microsoft, so doing demonstrations and doing pretty much what a lot of the other TSPs in the partner channel do, except I can now really help the partners rather than just being an individual contributor at the partner level. And then recently, I think it was the beginning of this year, I got the opportunity to move up to what Microsoft called the GBB group, or the Global Black Belt group. And that's more of a national team for demonstrations, but also the good thing about that is that there's a lot more chance to play around and tinker with really all the technologies that are Microsoft, not just the Dynamics 365 finance and operations tool set. So as really a background, I've been working through the partner channel, and now here at Microsoft, sort of helping everybody out and spreading as much of the Dynamics faith as I possibly can.
Yeah, the global black belt groups, as I understand them, they tend to sort of be the people who kind of come in and help anyone else who needs to learn about the latest products get up to speed on them, whether it's internal to Microsoft or it can reach out to the partner channel as well. Is that right? Are you kind of working with a mix of audiences?
Yeah, it tends to we at the global black belt level. Then there's always gaps at the partner level, and even here at Microsoft on skills, because not everyone knows the entire product. And for the most part, everyone's regionalized. For example, in the southeast or northeast or central region, and as the global black belts, and we can really sort of insert ourselves in and help where we can. But also there's every now and then there are international opportunities where we can go out and help as well. So there's a couple of different variations of global black belts. There's, for example, like Azure and AI black belts, and then there's the field service and the sales and the marketing global black belts, and then also the my group, or our group, which is the finance and operations black belts. But we, as deals sort of get more elaborate, then we don't remain siloed. We can help each other and sort of get the complete solution out there for demonstrations or for education, rather than just part of the solution, which would be like finance and operations or CRM or modern workplace and things like that.
Is that what's happening these days in your experience, that deals are more complex or more components to them?
The I think there's a lot more that's going on with with what we're proposing to the customers. And one of the real the good things was that although it did have its growing pains, was the sort of combination of everything Dynamics into Dynamics 365, and also the fixing up and the rationalizing of the licenses, because now we can propose a more complete solution. And there's things, even though I'm a finance and operations person, there are things that I know CRM does better than finance and operations. Or, for example, sometimes we may want to use the model-driven apps that are available within CRM or within the common data service. So now we're starting to weave more of these things in, because it's cost effective, and also it's really the best tool for the prospect or for the demonstration.
That sounds like it's right up your. As you said, it sounds like it's right up your alley. The ability to sort of bring these different things in as needed, and just from what I know of, past demos you've done, all the writing you've done, you're always looking for sort of ways to get more out of the existing products. Do you like the role?
Yeah, I love the role. It's I've got a lot of flexibility. It's even though in the past my being a TSP has always been interesting because it's the businesses that you work with. Now the wider resources that I have, and being able to play around with all of these new technologies, especially the Azure technologies and the AI tools that are out there. So I don't know whether I may have told you, but my original degree was in AI because I don't really want to do any business software work, which didn't really work out for me. So here I am. But so now 23 years later, I can actually start dusting off some of those skills and doing even more clever things. Although on that note, it's not that hard to do some of the things that 23 years ago you had to sort of manage or create by hand, because everything's set up as a library or a service within Azure, so it's almost like cheating. But yeah, it's the weaving in of all of the different things to make things so much easier, and that's the exciting thing. And other areas like bot management and the bot framework, then the changing of the story from just sort of transactions to more of a conversation-based interfaces. Then for me, that's just fascinating, and such a neat thing to go out and experiment with and just see what we can do.
Do you feel like you're going out and sort of having really emphasizing one or two particular either technologies or use cases over and over, or is it really varied depending on who the audience is?
It's going to be varied, because not where, and especially now with the environment that we're in, with all of the different ERP systems, we have to differentiate ourselves so that we're not thought of as a commodity, because that's the worst thing ever. Someone just says, "Oh, you're an ERP system or you're a CRM system." So we need to tailor a lot of what we're talking to the audience based off what their true pain points are. And it could, and not, even though you can do generic sort of presentations, it's not everyone's going to have their different touch points that they're interested in. And we're also seeing that it's not the base system, like Dynamics, is not the true power. It's how we leverage everything, which includes finance and operations, of course, but how we leverage the cloud and the Office 365 and the business apps together. So that's sort of like a long way of saying that everyone's special, and you've got to treat everyone as a unique opportunity and choose the tools that sort of fit them.
Yeah, it does sound like one of the one of the reasons I asked that was just to sort of understand the global black belt role. I've heard more and more about it myself, maybe in the last year or so, and it seems like you go to different, like you said, regions or offices or scenarios, and there's teams that have some expertise in one area but not in another. I mean, I know, like, for example, maybe to go on the CRM side, like maybe it's field services or project service automation, and a team just doesn't have someone who can talk about those solutions, or maybe it's on the finance and operations side that there's not someone with the right skills, and that a member of the global black belt team kind of steps in and helps get them up to speed, teaches people how to sell it, how to demo it, right? But then I guess, are you getting more involved in that? Are you still getting to talk to customers and really propose individual solutions and get into competitive scenarios too?
Yeah, it's actually both of those that I'm involved with, because there's still the global black belts still have sales objectives that they need to reach, but there's also a lot of the benefit that people get is not from doing the same thing over and over again, is going out and extending out and learning how to use the different technologies in different scenarios. So part of our role is to help with the sales, but also the other part is really to dig in and learn how everything works. So that, because if you know how the underpinnings and all of the reason why a product works a certain way, then you can extrapolate and you can work out how else you can use it. And that's another part of the role, which is to really have that deeper sort of understanding of technology, so that then we can augment the other regions as well. So it's part sales or presentations to customers or to the user groups, or in the EBCs, the executive briefing centers, but also it's the going out and really getting that holistic view of how everything works. And I'm not an expert in any means on a lot of the other areas, but I do know enough to sort of work through it. For example, I know a little bit about the field service, but I was able to sort of dive in and work out how the IoT devices work, so that you can actually create one rather than just using an emulator. And that was fun to have a breadboard and components and actually put it together and then see everything work through Azure. So a lot of people don't have, in the regional area, don't have a lot of that time or to sort of get down to that level. So for me, that's that's another reason why I like this position, because there's all these sort of fringe areas that we can play around with.
Well, okay, that's one good example that I wanted to maybe have you dive into that. Tech that you've been able to play with that you think has a lot of potential, that maybe either people in the field or customers of Microsoft's haven't yet really gotten their arms around yet. Are there others you would call out in particular that you've been able to work with recently?
And I don't know whether it's something that people aren't familiar with, because I know not a lot of people talk about it, but things like flow and logic apps it's like pure gold, because what we can do with the automation tools that they provide from an integration standpoint and connecting to other systems, it's amazing, because it's like 230 different connectors that you can either use for personal workflow, or you could use for business level workflow with logic apps. And I remember in the past thinking, how on earth are you going to go out and integrate with even just a simple database? And now we can go and leverage this, and we can build things which with no code, and do it really quickly, and it's a strong integration. So there's things like that. There's I know bots are sort of people talk about bots quite a bit, and maybe you people sort of tune them out because all they think of them as a as like something that you'd see when you go to the Dell website and they pop up and say, "Do you want to talk to me?" and things like that. But there are, from an automation standpoint, the bots don't have to necessarily always have a conversation with you, because they can be always going out, and um, they can analyze your what you have within Office. So, for example, you can use the Office graph to go out and see what the emails are and who's who in the zoo and all of these things. But you can go out and, rather than have the bot sort of you talk to it first, it can go out and always be looking for things and then make suggestions. So these having a proactive conversation where the bot initiates the conversation, I think is a different way of looking at it. And from an automation, then this is great.
It sounds a little more like a personal assistant type of bot than a service kind of a bot,
Yeah, that's
concierge
exactly.
kind of a bot.
Yeah, and I just created one for a demonstration that I'll be doing next week, and to make the bot even more powerful, or more useful, what I did is I gave the bot an Active Directory alias. So then the bot has its own email, it can have its own task list, it can connect to finance and operations, and it can connect to sales to grab information, and it's a little bit more autonomous. And then what you can do is you can go out and you can talk to it through Teams, or you can ask it questions, but then it can also pick up emails and file them away and do all of this legwork that is that's just administration for the most part. And then if you another great tool that's out there is Lewis, and that's the language understanding. So one of the
LUIS.
LUIS, I think it's Lewis.ai, and this is uh, I think, an incredibly useful tool, because what you do is you train it on language, and the reason why this is neat is not only can you give it a number of different ways of saying the same thing, but then you tag it and say, if they're asking this question, then this might be a customer name, or this might be a person, or this might be a date, and then it takes the language and then sort of strips it out and says, uh, this this sentence is probably looking up a product, and this is probably the product name that the person is looking for. But you can then use it to go out and um, read email subjects, find out if an email comes in, then you could go out and guess on what the intent of the email is, and then do different things based off it. The other AI tools that are out there, which um, which are very clever, and I don't know how you do this normally, are things like the image recognition and the facial recognition portion. So the image recognition, all you do is you go out and you give it a whole slew of images of a certain product, and then it will go out and you classify it, and then you'd have all these different products, and it'll go out. You feed it an image, and it will say this is an Xbox controller, or this is a spanner or a wrench, and some of the other GBBs have used this to go out and create product recognizers, but they created them as a Power App, but then linked them into finance and operations. So imagine if you had a product, or maybe if it was pharmaceuticals, if you had a pill and you didn't know what it was, then you could just scan the image and it could go out and try to recognize this. And so I created a similar example after I was at Home Depot, and the Home Depot app actually does this. We had a bolt or something, and it didn't have a barcode. So the clerk went out, just pulled up her app, used the image recognition, found what the part code was, and then put it into the point of sale. So these are really hard things that are now really easy because all of the compute resources and all of the AI portion is up in Azure, and we don't have to do any coding. So all of that, those sort of higher level things, we can go and build apps or applications or incorporate them into existing systems with very little work. And for that I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, it's interesting just to. So I think I wasn't keeping really close track, but I think you just managed to incorporate like four different cool things
Yeah.
into that explanation there. So going back to bots again, the scenario you were describing where you take the notion of a bot, give it more of the tools or the resources that a person might have, and get it to then understand how to take care of duties that are repetitive, that are annoying, that are time consuming. I mean, that sounds to me like robotic process automation to an extent. Has that entered into your view also? It's certainly something I know because we've had vendors do webcasts on it. We've had white papers published about it. Again, by vendors who sort of who trade in that area now, and it seems to be getting a lot of interest from people, especially on the AX and D365 finance and operations side of our readership. I know. Are you seeing it under those terms, or are you really attacking it more from the let's start with a bot, let's sort of start building out these areas?
Yeah, for me again, and keep in mind, I'm just a tinkerer, so I just take these technologies and sort of start trying to see what I can do and weave them together. The more and more the automation for me is going to be more important because again, that gives you a lot of control, or gets rid of the menial work,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
allows people really to do something that's a lot more exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So okay, so let's see. So we went from sort of the development of custom bots and giving them activities to do to some of the AI based things. You mentioned facial recognition. You mentioned image recognition. You didn't touch on sentiment analysis. That's another one that's actually been around for a while, I guess. But it also has some pretty cool uses to it.
Yeah, and the sentiment analysis is neat because it can. Oh, and the emotion API. So there's two different. There's the text, and then there's
Sentiment and emotion.
the facial recognition. Because
Okay.
if you go out and use the face API, you what you do is you train it on the face, and then when you get the responses back, it'll actually say what the emotional state of the person
Hmm.
is from the image. But the sentiment analysis is from the text standpoint is is really neat because it does give you sort of that starting baseline for any text. The sentiment analysis is is just again like one of those tools that you just can take advantage of. And I know I set up an automation where it goes out, and I think it checked my emails as they were coming in, and would notify me of any emails that came in with a lower sentiment than I wanted. The from a business standpoint, then this is useful because you can go out to Twitter, you could go to Facebook, you could go to any of the connectors and watch information, and then check for the sentiment. The I tried I ran an experiment and tried one of the emails that you get trying to weasel you out of money, and I was for that one example, I was a little bit disappointed because the sentiment analysis thought, oh, this is a great person, so they would have given money right away. So there's it's interesting again. There's so many tools out there. Other areas which are they're not quite as exciting as like image recognition and all of those things, but the Bing translation, the spell check. There are services out there that we can go out and take advantage of for correcting text. So, say for example, if you did have a bot, then that you went out and just got information through, then you can use the spell checker within the Azure services to go out and fix it up and correct any errors before it even goes over to the next level, so that you could get a cleaner response directly from whatever service you're connecting to. So, and other just sort of rattling off other services, the mapping API that's available through Bing Maps, then that's really interesting, because what you can do is you could give it an address, and it will go and find the closest match to the address and then give you the longitude and latitude. But then you can push it back through and find the actual address and validate it just through the Maps API. So and I'm just scratching the surface on all of these different things. So this is why I love my job, because there's this chance to look at all of these different things and work out where they apply and how we can use them.
One of the other things that I imagine is pretty cool is that you're one of the first touch points of a lot of the technology kind of coming out of the chute of the Microsoft R&D teams, and they're different teams, right? Doing a lot of these different things, which each one is its own set of challenges and requires its own, R&D. And I imagine you're touching it before most other people outside of R&D. Do you get a chance to also give feedback to the teams that are creating this stuff? Do they get to hear from you and say, "Here's how we're actually trying to put this in front of companies or organizations"?
Yeah, there's the R&D group are very, very open, and we do. It's not like we've got a direct or complete access to R&D. There's still things that just like everyone else, we have to wait for when the new releases come out. But for being such a larger company like Microsoft, all of the R&D group are very, very accessible. So a lot of the times if we do catch wind of a product or something, then they'll bend over backwards to help us and give us feedback. One of the examples was, it was probably around about a year and a half ago, right before the mobile workspaces came out within finance and operations. So that's where we can go out and we can build a mobile app directly through the screen just by pointing and clicking and adding fields, and then we publish it out as a mobile app that then can run online and offline. So this hadn't been delivered yet, but we had an opportunity where they wanted these offline capabilities. So somehow through the grapevine, we caught wind of these mobile workspaces. They still weren't released, but we were able to work with product development and get work out how it works and show it to the customer. And we were doing that lockstep with product development, and that was good for they appreciated that, because they were getting some other real world feedback too. So there's a lot of things that if we can find out who's working on something, then we can at least see what they're doing, and probably not influence them a lot, but but at least give them a little bit of feedback, and they're always receptive to that.
It's one thing, yeah, and that is pretty cool. And it's one thing to do that sort of within something like an ERP features being added, but it's another when it's to me it seems like something much more granular, a text recognition or a text analysis tool, a facial analysis tool, something with geographic processing, where it's almost like it maybe doesn't do a whole lot on its own. It has to be used in some other bigger context. And the technology is very powerful, but it's not. It has to be consumed in some way, right?
Yeah.
And I imagine when a company like Microsoft is putting out some of those things, I assume usually there's a particular business case they're building for to some extent. But I mean, it seems like it's backing into the sort of somewhere closer to the really true research sort of realm with at least some of it. Where it doesn't, you know what I mean? Where it doesn't have a really strong direct use case coming right out of the product development team.
And sort of on that thread, it was interesting. I did a presentation at one of the conferences showing how to use Flow, but I was using Flow with finance and operations and a little bit of CRM. And then someone from the product development group came up and she said, "This is great because we never see it really being used with something other than Office." Or so it's where from our standpoint in the finance and operations, we're almost like we're a consumer of everything, and from Dynamics 365, because we can consume all of these different tool sets. Whereas sort of what you were talking about is the tools themselves. If they're taken just as a tool, then they're not. It's not that they're not strong, but they're not giving their full. We're not showing the full potential.
It's interesting to hear about that response on Flow, because I mean that's one of my favorite areas right now. We do a series of that we call flows from the field, and basically we just sort of scan what other people are writing about the flows that they're creating, because people can get so creative with them. I'll have to get you tied into that somehow if you ever document or are publishing any of those cases, because it is just so fun to see some of the things that are. I mean, and it's such a range. Everything from sort of creating, public-facing APIs, sort of hacking together public-facing APIs for systems, or just doing business rule checking stuff, or integration of data in different ways. Managing whatever. I mean, really, almost anything you can imagine, right?
And sometimes it's interesting to see what people build. And because there's one example, there's a gentleman, Jivtesh Singh from Australia, and he makes amazing flows and integrations. And he created one that he called the Steve Ballmer virtual assistant, because not many people know that Steve Ballmer was actually Bill Gates' assistant for a while, and then he moved up the ladders just a bit. So, but he created this flow, which must have had you just scrolled down the window and there was more and more and more. It would go out and it would check an email, and then it would use sentiment analysis. And I think it used Lewis to go out and capture some other information. Then it went out and created an email and sent it to the person saying, "You need to look at this." And then along the way, it went out and looked up in Bing for information on the customer that it had extracted from the email, and sort of did all of these things. And when you look at it, you think, how on earth did anyone think of doing this? But you don't. My theory is you don't start off with this large thing that does all of these different things. It sort of builds up and it evolves over time to really elaborate flows. So it's a seeing how these processes sort of get born and turn into these really elaborate sort of things, I think is even more interesting. because again, you don't for some of the more complicated things, you don't. I don't think people can even think for the most part that this is what I want to do. They'll start tinkering and adding and moving things around and shuffling things around, and end up with these like amazing and really pretty business processes that they've automated.
Yeah, I've seen some big ones where they'll zoom out at the whole flow sort of model that they built, and they can be very you really have to zoom in on one particular area of it to really understand what it's doing, and each part is doing something fairly fairly in depth or very very specific, and when you talk about complexity with flow, because I think you mentioned this earlier at some point, that you deal with both Flow and Azure Logic apps, and as most people probably know, Flow is sort of a child or sort of a subset of Azure Logic apps capabilities. It's based in the same technology, right? Where do you find that you make the distinction between the two?
Because I just I was introduced to Flow and I knew nothing about Logic Apps, and then I thought, oh, there's this thing up in Azure called Logic Apps, and I thought, oh, it must be based off Flow. But what they've done is Logic Apps, I think, has been around for a while, and it was just a variation of it came down to become the personal workflow for Flow. Flow is a personal workflow. It's really designed for.
Is that still how it's described when you talk to companies?
It's maybe not how it's described officially, but it's really that's the only way that I can sort of explain it, because it's like the flows are really yours. You can share them within the team, but you go and build them, and they sort of reside under your account. And even when it gets licensed, you get X amount of flows that you can run a month. But then that's pulled together to a degree based on how many Office user licenses you have. I think I can have in my system like 450,000 flows a month, which I'd never even get close to. So, but the problem that some people see is, you can think of it as a integration tool, but the problem that comes up is that what happens when someone leaves or an account gets disabled? So what happens to those flows within the organization? So if you go out and try to use Flow as an integration tool between systems, then there's a situation where you could lose those because they're really associated with a person within the organization. Now, there's ways that you can get around that. You could create a service account and license it, and then set up all the flows, and then that service account runs it, and it'd work pretty well. But the important thing is that Flow has a limited number of transactions that it can run in the month. It's a large number, but it's still a limited number. Now, Logic Apps runs up in Azure, and you pay for it on demand. And so every time a Logic App fires, then you'll get charged an Azure amount, but I think it's like 0.00024 cents per transaction. So if you do the math, you have to be running a lot of transactions for it really to add up to be a lot. But that if you're integrating with other systems and you want it always to be running, then you convert a flow, or you create it as a Logic App. So if you're doing integrations, or if you're doing system to system work, or if you're doing something which isn't really related to a user, then the best thing to do is to put it up in Azure and run it as a Logic App, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So but in essence, they're the same. They've got the same UI. They've got almost the same connectors. Logic Apps has some other connectors for EDI that Flow doesn't have. But if you know one, then you know the other, and you just run it run it autonomously.
The Flow team, I thought at least a while ago, I'm kind of going on memory here, but that they had actually taken steps to kind of more industrialize the way flows are managed, and maybe it gets toward what you were talking about sort of just allowing for service accounts or allowing for shared ownership of flows, so that you
Yeah,
don't run into that when Steve leaves IT or whatever, and you lose that nice integration that people had started to count on.
yeah, and converting a flow to a team flow is one way you can do it. That you just share it, and then it becomes a team flow, and multiple people can access it. So that's one thing. Something else that I didn't realize it did until probably a month ago is that there are a lot of data governance rules with Flow. So, and the the great thing about Flow is Flow, you can do anything. You can access Excel spreadsheets, you can automate things, but on that's also a bad thing, because if you don't want to have data leaks going out of the organization. So within Flow they added some additional capabilities around the security that said you can't use these connectors in conjunction. So you can't, for example, go out and get a list of customers and then copy it to an FTP site or send it to somewhere else
So would this be
using
like
different
within
connectors.
an individual company could set those kinds of rules?
Yeah, so that's just something that you set up within the Office account,
Okay.
Office tenant, and so that's interesting because the making sure that that too much information isn't being automatically taken out of the system is an important thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the governance experts are probably throwing things at their speakers, listening to all these ideas. No, don't
Yeah.
do any of that. None of it.
So, yeah, I live in the perfect world
Right.
where there's no problems, but I know other people don't quite live there.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Depends. It's so dependent on who you have the conversation with on that stuff. But nevertheless, it is definitely one of my favorite areas too, as you were saying. Um, all right, cool. Well, we haven't had you. So much fun stuff that you tend to cover. We'll definitely have to talk more after today about getting you back for some kind of an open webcast or something to show people what you've been working on, and maybe some of the things in D365 or in some of these other related areas that you're having the most fun with these days, and the customers seem to be getting the most out of these days, because that's one of the things that you do such a great job of reflecting is not just the tech, but sort of where people find it, where it's playing well, or you know what I mean, where it's doing its best job to impress people.
And you can have me back anytime. So.
Awesome. All right. Anything else you wanted to touch on here today? I know you said you have a few book updates in the works.
Actually, this I had a major milestone. It was 2 years ago, last Thanksgiving. I started the revision of my Barebones companions guides, and moving them up from 2012 up to Dynamics 365. And over Thanksgiving, I finished the last three modules. So that was a major milestone. It's taken a while because things like work is consuming my time, but I'm happy to say that all 10 of the guides have now been upgraded to Dynamics 365, and now I start on the process of starting to update them again for the 8.1 release and all of the new capabilities that are out there.
So 8.1, when it gets to 8.2, is that the point at which everyone essentially on finance and operations is then evergreen?
That I'm not quite sure about the exact version, because it's
Yeah. Okay.
but we actually saw part of that with the 8.1. There's an 8.1.2 release that was just released out, and that's on platform update 22. And for the first time that I know of, all we do to get that update is to install one package through Lifecycle Services, and it applies all the X++ code and all of the platform updates all at once, and then turns sort of updates the entire system. So in the past, what you'd have to do is you'd have to go out, do the platform update, and then try to get all the XML code, the X++ code, and apply it. So from now on, it's going to be, at least for the one-box environments, and I'm suspecting for the customers in production as well, the keeping up to date on just the baseline system is going to be a lot easier to do. All the hurdles that we had to jump through if we wanted to get the individual code applied, we don't. All of that's just disappeared.
And does that change the way you have to You're going to sort of try to keep your Barebones guides up to date as well. I imagine. I don't know. Is that going to be an easier situation for you, or perhaps a more challenging one?
It's all based off the timing, and but I know now at least that if I start off on a guide and maybe it's on one minor version like the 8.1.2, then I can work through the guides, and then if halfway through I need to move up to 8.1.3 or some version like that, then I don't have to start from scratch, because that's what I have been having to do in the past, sort of get everything documented as fast as I can so that everything's consistent. So there's my life, as I go out and sort of do more of this the updates and the revisions, then I think it's going to be a lot easier.
Cool. Well, hey, this has been a lot of fun. I think we need to start wrapping up here. But thank you so much for taking the time. It's always great to catch up.
And I look forward to it.
All right. Thanks so much, Murray.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jason.
This has been another episode of the MSDW Podcast. My thanks to Murray Fife for joining me today. You can find more of Murray's writings and thoughts at his A Tinkerer's Notebook blog. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.